Admiral Vexler's tentacles curled around his command chair as he watched another defense platform dissolve into glittering dust. The Void Collective's attack wasn't just an invasion. It was an erasure of everything the Galactic Confederation had built over 10,000 years. "Status report on Outpost Sentinel," he demanded, his crystalline voice sharp with tension. Lieutenant Zixtel, whose blue-scaled skin had paled to an ashen gray, manipulated the holographic controls with trembling fingers. "Sir, Outpost Sentinel. It's just gone. No debris field, no energy signature. 17,000 personnel. Just vanished." The massive viewing screen of the Confederation flagship Eternal Dawn showed the approaching Void Collective ships, if they could even be called ships. They were more like tears in reality, purple-black rifts that pulsed with impossible geometries. Whatever they touched simply ceased to exist, converted into pure energy, and absorbed into their unknowable mass. The Arxian home defense grid is reporting critical failures across all sectors. Another officer called out. Their quantum shield generators are operating at 300% capacity, but the barriers are failing faster than they can be reinforced. Vexler felt his secondary heart skip a beat. The Arxians were the Confederation's masters of defensive technology. Their shield systems had protected the galaxy's core worlds for millennia. If they couldn't hold. "Sir," Zixtal's voice cracked. "The Collective is deploying their phase shift weapons. They're targeting Arxian population centers directly." The viewing screen shifted to show Arxis Prime, the jeweled capital of the Confederation's most advanced civilization. Its crystalline spires had stood for 50 generations, each one a testament to the power of ordered, logical progression of technology. The Void Collective's weapons bypassed the failing shields completely, their energy tendrils reaching down like hungry fingers. Where they touched, matter simply unraveled. Buildings, vehicles, and people dissolved into their component atoms, feeding the Collective's insatiable hunger for energy. The screams of thousands, then millions, echoed across the emergency channels before they too fell silent. 3 billion dead, Zixtal whispered, breaking every protocol of bridge conduct. 6 days. It took them 6 days to. He couldn't finish the sentence. In the chamber of last resort, deep within the Eternal Dawn, the Confederation's Supreme Council gathered in emergency session. Representatives from 37 spacefaring races argued tactics, pleaded for reinforcements, or simply sat in stunned silence. High Counselor Merrick's, her crystalline form catching the light like a prism, addressed the assembly. "The Collective has already consumed 11 systems. Our most advanced weapons are useless. Our strongest shields might as well be vapor. We face extinction not through conquest, but through digestion. The Regulan Defense Force is deployed along the spiral arm," General Kvex announced, his insectoid mandibles clicking with agitation. They report similar results. Standard energy weapons are absorbed. Kinetic weapons pass straight through. It's as if we're fighting ghosts that can selectively interact with matter. "What of the Mechanoid Collective?" someone called out. "Surely they're quantum processors." "Overrun," Merrick's cut in. "Their binary nature made them even more vulnerable. The Void Collective absorbed their consciousness matrices directly. We lost contact 3 hours ago." A hologram appeared in the chamber center, showing the Void Collective's advance. System after system winked from green to red, creating a spreading stain across the galaxy's most populated sectors. The pattern was clear. They were methodically consuming everything in their path, growing stronger with each civilization they absorbed. At current rate of expansion, a strategic analysis unit reported, its glowing form pulsing with each word, total conquest of known space will occur within 73 standard days. No statistical probability of successful resistance has been calculated. The chamber erupted in voices, each counselor trying to propose increasingly desperate solutions. Launch their suns into black holes. Trigger artificial supernova. Retreat to pocket dimensions. Each suggestion was quickly shot down as either impossible or likely to accelerate their doom. In the chaos, Zixtel stood at his monitor station, staring at an ancient file he'd discovered deep in the restricted archives. Its header read, Species Quarantine Order 947, Earth/Humans, restricted due to dangerous levels of innovation and unpredictability. His hands trembled as he began to read. Lieutenant Zixtel's access card shouldn't have worked on the restricted archives. He was far too low-ranking, and the security systems were supposedly unbreakable. Yet the door slid open with an ancient hiss, revealing rows of crystalline data cores stretching into darkness. Security override accepted, the system chimed. Genetic lineage confirmation. Descendant of archive designer Zixmar recognized. His grandfather, of course, the old storyteller who'd filled his childhood with tales of strange beings from quarantined worlds. Everyone had thought they were just stories. The archive room hummed to life, holographic interfaces flickering between the data cores. His trembling fingers traced the file he'd found on his bridge terminal. Quarantine Order 947. Display full record, he commanded. The air shimmered, and a recording materialized. A much younger High Counselor Merrick stood before the ancient council, her crystalline form unmarred by the stress fractures she now carried. The species designates themselves human, she reported. Their technological level is minimal, but their approach to problem-solving is disturbing. When faced with a barrier, they don't stop at finding one solution. They find dozens, hundreds, each more improbable than the last. The recording showed scenes from Earth, humans turning poisonous beans into drinks, harnessing devastating nuclear reactions for power, transforming lethal petroleum into materials for everyday use. They turned their planet's deadliest predators into companions, another counselor noted with horror. They saw plants that could kill them and thought, yes, this should be dinner. Zixtel watched, fascinated, as the recording continued. Humans launching themselves into space in vessels that were little more than controlled explosions. Humans diving to crushing ocean depths in what amounted to reinforced boxes. Humans deliberately injecting themselves with weakened diseases to build immunity. Most concerning, Merrick's continued, is their response to failure. When their solutions don't work, they don't give up. They become more determined, more creative. They call it thinking outside the box, though they never define what this box is or why thinking should be confined to one in the first place. The council chamber erupted in concerned murmurs. And their warfare? Someone asked. Worse, they adapt faster in conflict than in peace. They turned simple projectile weapons into planet killers in less than a century. They developed powered flight and immediately used it for combat. But it's their tactical innovations that truly disturb. They don't follow conventional strategic logic. They look at a superior force and think, how can we win anyway? Zixtel's heart pounded as he fast-forwarded through the debate. The council's decision was clear. Humanity would be quarantined, their system surrounded by subtle deflector fields that would discourage both space exploration and outside contact. Not because they're too dangerous, he whispered, understanding finally. Because they're too unpredictable, too adaptable. His communicator chirped, another emergency council session. The Void Collective had just consumed the Proxima Defense Network. 3 more systems lost. The young lieutenant looked at the temporal stamp on the quarantine order, then at the current date. The humans had been isolated for centuries, yet the archive showed they'd been on the verge of numerous technological breakthroughs. What had they discovered in their isolation? What impossible solutions had they devised without the Confederation's restrictions on innovation? His decision crystallized. Racing through the corridors of the Eternal Dawn, he made his way to the private chambers of Admiral Vexlor. The guards tried to stop him. A mere lieutenant had no business disturbing a flag officer, but Zixtel's security override worked here too. Sir, he burst out, finding the Admiral staring at casualty reports. I found something. A species that might help. One that specializes in impossible solutions. Lieutenant, We've consulted every species in the Confederation. Not this one. They're quarantined. Have been for centuries. But, sir, they turned their planet's deadliest poison into a breakfast beverage. They domesticated apex predators because they were lonely. They look at certain death and start inventing ways to survive it. Vexler's tentacles stiffened. You're talking about Earth. The humans. His voice dropped to a whisper. The quarantine was enacted for good reason, Lieutenant. Yes, sir. Because they were too good at doing the impossible. And right now, sir. Zixtal's voice steadied. We need impossible. Dr. Amanda Walker had expected a lot of things when the aliens landed on the White House lawn. Mass panic. Military responses. Religious crisis. What she hadn't expected was to learn that humanity had been cosmic grounded. Let me get this straight, she said, standing before the United Nations Security Council and their alien visitors. You've been deflecting our deep space signals, nudging our probes off course, and basically keeping us in a galactic timeout because we're too creative. High Commander Zixtal shifted uncomfortably, his scaled skin reflecting the chamber's lights. The Council felt your species' approach to problem-solving was too unconventional. You see solutions where there should be none. A laugh bubbled up from Amanda's throat. The assembled diplomats stared at her in shock, but she couldn't help it. Here were advanced aliens, masters of technology beyond human imagination, and they were terrified of humanity's penchant for wild ideas. Commander, she managed, wiping tears from her eyes, you're telling me that the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy are being eaten by energy beings, and you need people who specialize in doing the impossible. That is one way to put it, Zixtal admitted. The chamber's screens lit up with footage from the front lines. Crystalline cities dissolving into vapor. Mighty warships being consumed like sugar and coffee. Entire populations vanishing in purple-black waves of entropy. 3 trillion dead, Lieutenant Zixtal added softly. Nothing works against them. Energy weapons are absorbed. Physical weapons pass through them. Our greatest minds can't even comprehend how they're converting matter to energy so efficiently. Amanda studied the footage, her scientific mind already racing. Those energy patterns, they look like quantum probability waves, but organized, almost like. Dr. Walker, the UN Secretary General, interrupted. Perhaps we should discuss the broader implications of this revelation. The fact that we've been deliberately isolated. With all due respect, Amanda cut in, we can be angry about the quarantine later. Right now, there's a threat that's consuming entire civilizations. Lieutenant, you mentioned matter-energy conversion. Have you tried reversing the polarity of your shield generators to create a quantum decoherence field? The alien officers stared at her blankly. No, Zixtal said slowly. Our shield technology is designed to deflect or absorb energy, not. What exactly is a decoherence field? Amanda grinned. Something that shouldn't work, but might. Just like coffee shouldn't be drinkable, but we made it work. Just like we shouldn't have survived as a species, but we did. She turned to the Secretary General. Sir, I recommend we accept their request for help. Dr. Walker, they imprisoned our entire species. They tried to put a species that turns radioactive rocks into power sources in a timeout, she countered. How well did that work out? Look at what we accomplished even with their restrictions. Imagine what we can do with access to their technology. The chamber erupted in debate, but Amanda's attention was already back on the tactical displays. Her mind raced with possibilities, each one more outlandish than the last. Quantum tunneling barriers, probability manipulation fields, Wheeler-DeWitt pocket universes. Commander, she addressed Zixtal, I'm going to need access to your physics databases, engineering specifications, and especially your failed experiments. Sometimes the best solutions come from ideas that shouldn't work. The alien commander's expression was unreadable, but his posture showed relief. You're not angry about the quarantine. Amanda's smile turned predatory. Oh, we're furious. But right now, you need impossible solutions, And that's literally what humanity does best. We'll discuss reparations after we save the galaxy. She paused. Though I have to ask, did you really think you could keep humans contained forever? The Council believed the deflection fields were perfect. Commander, humans look at perfect systems and immediately start thinking of ways to break them. It's practically our species' hobby. Now, about those physics databases. Major Jack Thompson stood before the holographic display aboard the Eternal Dawn, squinting at the Void Collective's attack patterns. Coffee cup in hand, the aliens had been horrified to learn humans still drank it. He traced the energy being's movements with his finger. Play it again, he requested. But this time, speed it up by factor of 12. The alien technicians complied, and the purple-black tendrils of the Void Collective's attacks accelerated. Their seemingly random destruction took on a familiar pattern. Well, I'll be damned, Jack muttered. That's a hurricane. Admiral Vexler's tentacles twitched. A what? Hurricane. Storm system from Earth. See how they're moving in this spiral pattern. And look at these energy readings. Jack pointed to the data streams. High pressure here, low pressure there. They're not just attacking. They're following natural energy gradients, just like weather systems on Earth. The bridge crew stared at him blankly. Don't you see? Jack put down his coffee, excitement building. We've been trying to fight them like they're soldiers, but they're behaving like a natural phenomenon. These energy beings, they're basically a cosmic storm. Dr. Amanda Walker, who had been analyzing shield frequencies nearby, looked up sharply. Jack, are you thinking what I'm thinking? Weather satellites, they said in unison. I don't understand, Lieutenant Zixtal admitted. What are weather satellites? Jack pulled up Earth's meteorological database on a nearby console. Back home, we learned to predict and even influence weather patterns using specialized satellites. They're not particularly advanced, just modified electromagnetic field generators really. But they work because they understand how storms think. Storms don't think, one of the alien scientists objected. Figure of speech, Amanda cut in. But they do follow patterns. Jack, remember that experimental weather control system they tried in the Pacific? The one that failed spectacularly. Jack grinned. Created a Category 6 hurricane instead of dispersing it. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm thinking about. He grabbed a datapad and began sketching rapidly. The aliens watched in confusion as he drew what looked like primitive machinery designs. Look, your quantum shields are too complex, he explained. The Void Collective just flows around them like water around a rock. But what if we stopped trying to block them and started trying to redirect them instead? Amanda was already running simulations. If we modify the electromagnetic pulse generators from their defense platforms, add some quantum field oscillators, and arrange them in a grid pattern like weather satellites, Jack continued, we could create an artificial pressure system. They finished together. Admiral Vexler's tentacles had gone completely still. You want to fight an advanced energy-based species with weather control technology. Primitive weather control technology, Jack corrected cheerfully. Sometimes the best supercomputer is a thundercloud, Admiral. The Void Collective evolved to counter advanced energy weapons and shields. But I bet they've never had to deal with something as simple as manipulated air pressure patterns. The bridge erupted in overlapping conversations as the alien crew debated the feasibility of this absurd plan. But Amanda was already compiling the necessary modifications, while Jack sketched more detailed designs on his pad. It's not elegant, he admitted to Zixtal, who was watching him work with fascination. It's actually kind of crude. But that's the point. The Void Collective expects you to fight back with advanced technology. They're ready for that. But sometimes the best solution isn't the most advanced one. It's the one no one expects. And this will work? Zixtal asked uncertainly. Jack shrugged. Maybe. Probably not perfectly. But you know what humans do when our first solution isn't perfect. What? We try again. And again. We keep modifying and experimenting until something works. That's why you quarantined us, right? Because we don't know when to quit." For the first time since the war began, a smile crossed Zixtal's alien features. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "that is exactly what the galaxy needs right now." Laura Miller hadn't expected to find herself on an alien flagship at the age of 63. After 30 years of teaching high school history, she planned for a quiet retirement. Instead, here she was, watching tactical displays at 3 in the morning, wondering why something felt so familiar. "Play the battle footage again," she requested, adjusting her reading glasses. The alien technicians had offered to fix her eyesight, but she declined. Some habits were comforting, especially when surrounded by the utterly foreign. The hologram showed the Void Collective's latest advance, their energy-formed ships surrounding populated systems, cutting off supply lines, slowly consuming everything within. "Well, butter my biscuit," she muttered. "It's the Boston Tea Party in reverse." Admiral Vexlor turned all 4 of his eye stalks toward her. "The what?" "The Boston Tea Party. American Revolution." Laura stood up, teacher mode activating automatically. See, back in 1773, the British Empire had military superiority over the American colonies. Their navy controlled the seas, their army was better equipped, and their resources were vastly superior. The admiral's tentacles curled with interest. And the colonists won anyway. They didn't try to match British military power. They attacked their economic power instead. The Tea Party wasn't about tea. It was about disrupting the East India Company's supply chain. The bridge crew stared at her blankly. "Look," she pulled up the tactical display. "You're fighting the Void Collective like they're an army, but they're behaving like an empire. They're not just destroying worlds. They're consuming resources, growing stronger with each conquest, just like the British Empire depended on its trade routes. The collective depends on its ability to absorb energy." Dr. Amanda Walker finished, catching on. "They're not just attacking. They're feeding." Laura nodded enthusiastically. "And what happens to an empire when you disrupt its supply lines?" Major Jack Thompson, who had been monitoring the weather control prototype's construction, spun around in his chair. "It starves." "Holy smokes, Mrs. Miller, you're talking about asymmetric warfare. Against energy beings." "Precisely." Laura's eyes sparkled. The colonists didn't have to defeat the entire British military. They just had to make holding the colonies too costly to be worth it. The bridge erupted in excited chatter as the implications sank in. Laura pulled up more historical data on her tablet. "The Void Collective follows predictable consumption patterns," she explained. "They surround a system, cut it off, then systematically absorb everything within. But what if we poisoned the well?" "We've tried contaminating systems with radioactive material," Zixtal objected. "They just absorb that too." "Because that's still energy," Laura countered. "I'm talking about making the energy itself unstable, unpredictable." She turned to Amanda. "Doctor, what would happen if we modified those weather control satellites to create quantum instability fields instead of pressure systems?" Amanda's eyes widened. "Like a quantum Boston Harbor, making the energy itself too unstable to absorb. That's brilliant. We could." "Speaking of brilliant," Jack interrupted, "remember what the colonists did with those lanterns in the Old North Church? 1 if by land, 2 if by sea. Signal codes." Laura beamed at her former student. "The Void Collective intercepts all standard communications. But if we used your modified satellites to flash energy pulses in simple numerical patterns?" The aliens watched in amazement as the 3 humans rapidly built on each other's ideas, centuries of historical warfare combining with modern physics in ways no one had ever considered. "This is why we need you," Zixtal said softly. "Our civilizations became so focused on advancing technology that we forgot about our histories. We stopped learning from our past struggles." Laura patted his scaled hand. "That's the funny thing about history, dear. It doesn't just teach us about the past. Sometimes it shows us an entirely new way to look at the future." She turned back to the tactical display, a mischievous glint in her eye. Now, who wants to hear about how a bunch of farmers took down the world's most powerful empire? I promise it's relevant to our current situation. Colonel Ryan Hayes stood in the war room of the Eternal Dawn, surrounded by holographic maps showing the Void Collective's advance. His presentation had drawn representatives from every surviving species in the Confederation. The thing about fighting a superior force, he began, is that you don't have to be stronger. You just have to be smarter. He gestured to the displays. And more unpredictable. Our forces are being consumed system by system, a crystalline being objected. How does unpredictability help against total annihilation? Ryan smiled. Let me tell you about the ghost dance. He pulled up historical images from Earth. In the 1800s, Native American tribes faced enemies with superior weapons, numbers, and resources. They developed tactics that turned their weaknesses into strengths. He highlighted a particular sector where the Void Collective was advancing. We've modified the weather control satellites based on Major Thompson's design, but instead of creating one large quantum disruption field, we're going to create hundreds of tiny ones, like mirrors in a desert, each reflecting a different direction. Dr. Amanda Walker stepped forward. We found that the collective's sensor systems work similar to human vision. They focus on movement and energy signatures. So we give them too much to look at, Ryan finished. The ghost dance warriors would perform elaborate movements to confuse their enemy's aim. We're going to do the same thing with quantum signatures. The holographic display shifted, showing the modified satellite network. Each unit now produced multiple small disruption fields, creating a dazzling array of energy patterns. They can't absorb what they can't properly perceive, Laura Miller added from her station. And they can't attack what they can't predict. The alien representatives watched in fascination as the humans demonstrated their prototype. The quantum disruption fields didn't just confuse the Void Collective sensors, they created false targets, phantom energy signatures that drew their attention and resources. But that's not all, Ryan continued. We're combining this with something we learned from gold prospectors in the California Gold Rush. He nodded to Jack Thompson, who brought up new schematics. Hydraulic mining, Jack explained. They used pressurized water to tear apart mountains. We're modifying mining lasers to do something similar with quantum fields. When the collective tries to absorb energy from a system, the energy fights back. Amanda finished, like a fire hose against a wall of fog. The war room erupted in excited discussion as the implications became clear. The Void Collective's greatest strength, their ability to absorb and process energy, could become a vulnerability. We've already begun manufacturing the modified satellites, Ryan reported. But here's the real key. We're not going to use the same tactic twice. Every system will have a different configuration, a different pattern. The moment the collective adapts to one approach, we switch to another. Laura nodded. Just like the guerrilla fighters of Earth's history, never fight the same battle twice. Zixtel, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke up. This goes against every principle of military doctrine. Our strategies have always focused on perfecting a single approach. And that's exactly why the collective has been winning, Ryan pointed out. They can predict and counter any standardized tactic. But humans, he grinned, we specialize in chaos. The tactical display updated, showing the first test deployment around a threatened system. The Void Collective's advance had slowed, their usual efficient absorption patterns disrupted by the constantly shifting quantum fields. They're hesitating, an alien observer noted with wonder. For the first time since this war began, they're actually hesitating. Ryan nodded. Because for the first time, they're facing an enemy that doesn't play by the rules, an enemy that looks at their unstoppable advance and thinks, how can we make this work for us? That's humanity's real strength. We don't just adapt to chaos. We weaponize it. As the war room buzzed with new energy and hope, Laura Miller smiled at her former student. You know what this reminds me of? What's that, Mrs. Miller? Every time in history when someone thought they had an invincible strategy, right up until they met someone who refused to play their game. The Eternal Dawn's archive chamber was silent except for the soft hum of ancient data cores. High Counselor Merrick stood before the assembled human representatives, her crystalline form showing deep stress fractures from months of war. "We failed to tell you the complete truth about your quarantine," she began. "It wasn't just about your unpredictability. It was about what you represented, a path of evolution we had abandoned long ago." Dr. Amanda Walker, Major Jack Thompson, Laura Miller, and Colonel Ryan Hayes exchanged glances. Behind them, Lieutenant Zixtal watched with growing understanding. "Every species in the Confederation followed the same pattern," Merrick continued, activating a holographic display. "As we advanced, we specialized. The Arctians became masters of defense technology. The Regulans perfected energy manipulation. The Mechanoids achieved computational perfection. And humans," Amanda asked softly. "You refused to specialize. When faced with a problem, other species would refine their existing solutions. Humans." Merrick's crystalline features shifted in what might have been a smile. "You would invent 12 different solutions, most of them seemingly impossible, some of them completely absurd, and several of them brilliant in ways we couldn't comprehend." The hologram showed scenes from Earth's history: the first flight at Kitty Hawk, the moon landing, the development of quantum computing. But alongside these achievements were simpler innovations: a child's crayon drawing suggesting a new way to fold spacecraft wings, a garage inventor creating clean water systems from scrap parts. "We thought specialization was the path to advancement," Merrick admitted. "Perfect one approach, make it absolutely flawless. But you kept every option open. When one approach failed, you had dozens more ready to try. That's why the quarantine really happened," Zixtal added, stepping forward. "Not because you were dangerous, but because you reminded the Confederation of what they'd given up. The ability to think laterally, to approach problems from multiple angles." Laura Miller nodded thoughtfully. "Like teaching methods, I never used just one way to explain history. Different students need different approaches." "Exactly," Merrick said. "The Void Collective is winning because they can predict and counter any perfected system. But humans, you're effectively unpredictable because you never settled on just one system." Jack laughed. "Is that why you were so horrified by our weather control idea? Because it was deliberately imperfect. We couldn't understand why you would choose a crude solution when more advanced options existed," Zixtal admitted. "But that's exactly why it worked. The collective was prepared for perfect defenses. They had no countermeasure for intentional chaos." The hologram shifted to show recent battle footage. The quantum disruption fields, based on primitive weather satellites, creating havoc in the collective's formations. Mining lasers repurposed into energy dispersal weapons. Simple numerical patterns used to create secure communication networks. "Your greatest strength," Merrick continued, "is not in any one capability. It's in your refusal to be limited to just one way of thinking. Where we saw specialization as progress, you saw it as a limitation. That's why humans turned poison beans into coffee," Amanda mused. "We don't just solve problems. We refuse to accept that they're unsolvable in the first place." Ryan nodded. "And why we look at superior forces and start thinking about guerrilla tactics instead of direct confrontation. We're not trying to be the best at any one thing. You're trying to be good enough at everything," Zixtal finished. "To keep every possible option open." Merrick's form shimmered with emotion. "We thought we were protecting the galaxy by quarantining you. Instead, we nearly doomed it. We needed your chaos, your creativity, your stubborn refusal to accept limitations." "Well," Laura smiled, adjusting her reading glasses, "better late than never. Though I have to ask, did you really think a species that turns deadly plants into salad ingredients would stay quietly contained forever?" The archive chamber filled with laughter, human and alien alike. As they discussed further strategies, the hologram continued to play scenes from Earth's history, each one showing not the perfection of a single approach, but the endless variety of human innovation. "Perhaps," Merrick said softly, "it's time for the Confederation to remember how to be imperfect again." 6 months after humanity joined the war, the Void Collective retreated from their first major stronghold. A year later, they abandoned the Spiral Arm entirely. But the greater victory wasn't in the battles won, it was in how they were won. Admiral Vexlor stood before the Confederation Council, his tentacles moving with barely contained excitement as he delivered his report. The Regulan Defense Force, using modified Earth mining equipment, has successfully disrupted 3 major collective incursions. The Arctians have abandoned their perfect shield matrices in favor of randomized quantum field generators based on— He paused, still hardly believing it himself, based on Earth weather patterns. High Counselor Merrick's crystalline form sparkled with amusement. "And how are they handling this departure from perfection?" "That's the remarkable part." Dr. Amanda Walker stepped forward, now wearing the formal robes of Earth's first Confederation ambassador. "They're improving on it, not by making it more perfect, but by making it more unpredictable." The council chamber itself reflected the change. Where once it had been a model of crystalline symmetry, now it incorporated elements of organized chaos. Patterns that seemed random but served specific purposes, much like Earth's natural systems. "The mechanoids have been particularly enthusiastic," Colonel Ryan Hayes added. Once they understood that computational perfection was actually limiting them, they began experimenting with random number generation based on human neural patterns. Laura Miller, who had become the Confederation's first professor of historical innovation, smiled from her seat. "They're learning that history isn't just about remembering the past. It's about understanding how many different ways there are to solve a problem." The holographic displays showed the transformation spreading across the galaxy. Species that had spent millennia specializing were rediscovering their capacity for lateral thinking. The Void Collective, faced with an enemy that became more chaotic and unpredictable with each encounter, found their perfect absorption systems failing. "We've confirmed their full withdrawal from the Carina sector," Major Jack Thompson reported. "They're not just retreating, they're adapting. Our last encounters show them developing their own versions of unpredictable energy patterns." "So they're learning," someone worried. "Exactly," Jack grinned. "They're becoming less perfect, more chaotic, and that means they're becoming something we can actually negotiate with. They're developing individuality." The council chamber buzzed with conversation. The idea of negotiating with the collective had seemed impossible months ago. But then, so had the idea of fighting them successfully. Lieutenant Zixtel, recently promoted to head of interspecies innovation, brought up a new holographic display. "Earth has agreed to host the Confederation's first Center for Imperfect Solutions. Already, we have 10,000 students from various species learning not just human technology, but human approaches to problem solving, including how to make coffee," Amanda added with a wink. Though some species are still horrified by the concept. The chamber filled with laughter, another change brought by human influence. Formal proceedings had given way to more natural interactions, allowing for the kind of spontaneous connections that often led to breakthrough ideas. "The quarantine is officially lifted," Merrick's announced. "But more importantly, we're implementing what we're calling the human principle across all Confederation research and development." "Which is?" Laura asked, though her smile suggested she already knew. "Never stick to just one solution when you can try 12 impossible ones instead," Merrick's replied. "And never assume that perfection is better than adaptability." As the council session concluded, Ambassador Walker found herself looking out at the stars through the chamber's vast window. A year ago, those stars had seemed like they would soon be consumed by an unstoppable force. Now they sparkled with new possibilities. "You know what this reminds me of?" Laura joined her at the window. "What's that, Professor?" "Every renaissance in human history, it never came from perfecting the old ways. It came from being willing to try new ones, no matter how impossible they seemed. In the distance, a ship departed the station, one of the new hybrid designs, combining multiple species technologies in ways that should have been impossible. Its hull wasn't perfectly smooth like the old ships, but rather featured seemingly random patterns that created unpredictable energy flows. Humanity hadn't just helped save the galaxy. They had reminded it how to evolve.